Good morning, and it's Bible study time, Sunday school hour here at Calvary Baptist Church. I want to welcome you to come and study with us. Um, we've been looking at the Gospel of Luke and some instances through there in the life of Jesus where he taught his disciples about faith and the kind of faith that they should have. And so we looked the first couple weeks out of this unit at life-changing faith. And then we looked at a yielded faith. Today we look at an expectant faith. And this is out of the 8th chapter of Luke. In the 8th chapter of Luke, there's several things that happen there, especially verses 22 to 56. There's 4 miracles that you see being performed by Jesus throughout there, and it's kind of to not. I guess when we think about miracles, we think, oh, how amazing, how spectacular, how fantastic, but it's really done not so that we will think those things. Jesus did miracles so that we will think how amazing God is, and so that we'll learn from it how to enrich and deepen our faith. So. Our faith, of course, is meant to help us understand the involvement that God has in our lives and to be able to recognize his presence and his nearness and who he is and how we can trust him. So we're only going to look at really the last one of these, and it's kind of the last one. There's one, and then there's one in the middle of it, and then there's another one. And just in the life of Jesus, a day. And it's probably one that you may or may be familiar with, may not be, but hopefully you'll kind of know the story as we go through. So here's some things that I think we can think about out of this, just in introduction or preliminaries, that we can approach Jesus with all our needs, that we can believe in Jesus when things go wrong or awry, and that we can trust Jesus to provide what we need. So we're going to begin in Luke chapter 8, verse 41, and read 41 to 42. And this kind of gets us into this miracle, or into this setting where Jesus does healing. Okay, so we begin 8:41. Just then, it says, well, they've been doing all these other things. Just then, it says, a man named Jairus came. He was a leader of the synagogue. He fell down at Jesus' feet and pleaded with him to come to his house because he had only one daughter, about 12, and she was dying. While he was going, the crowds were nearly crushing him. Okay, so we see this story. Jesus had been across the Sea of Galilee in the land of the Gerasenes. He had been over there. He'd been healing. He'd been teaching. He'd been working with those people. And Scripture tells us that they asked him to leave because I think he was too revealing to them. I think we didn't quite understand really what was going on. And we read in the Scripture where Jesus was in Nazareth, and it was his hometown. And prophets not without honor except in his hometown, Jesus taught. It's because people know him before he became what God has been working to make him to become. But also, it says that he didn't do very many miracles there because of that fact. And so in the Gerasenes, it could be that the people weren't just open, or they weren't in quite tune with what God was doing. On the other side of the Galilee, Sea of Galilee today is the land of Jordan, and it's a separate nation, and they definitely are not in tune with what the Israelites are doing. If you understand how that area works there, they're definitely not in tune with that. So here we have this story then where Jesus gets back to Capernaum, or he gets back into the Galilee, the northern part of the Galilee, into that area. And while he is there, he's teaching. We know he did some teaching out on the hillside. We know he did some teaching as he was traveling from one place to the next. We know he did some teaching in the synagogue. We know he did some teaching on the streets. There were on the seashore. There were places where Jesus was, and he did teaching. So here he is. He's been out teaching there, and the crowd is pretty pressing. He was gone to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Now he's come back. And these people missed him. They probably missed the fact that he fed people, thousands at a time. He had done all these healings, done all these miracles. And so did they really miss him? Did they really miss his teaching about God? Or did they miss what he was doing? And I think it's a combination of all. And so the crowd was crushing him. They were pushing in so hard. There were so many people that had come because word was getting out from there. And so that Jesus was a healer. And if they got word that he was back in the area, then they're coming back, especially if they're sick or if they need something. So while he's been there, while he's walking along, he's been teaching and they've been kind of traveling along. Here comes a man named Jairus. And Jairus was the leader of the synagogue. That means that out of the people who took care of the synagogue, he was the main guy. He'd been elected president, so to speak, of that group. A synagogue, you had to have at least 10 men, which would represent 10 families, more than likely. Had to have 10 men, and then they would construct, or they would give them kind of a permission or kind of a charter to be a synagogue. And the thing about a synagogue was, since the law had been shifted and changed and been defined to say that you can only take so many steps on the Sabbath, why then the synagogue couldn't be any more than half that from your home, because that way you could get to the synagogue and worship and then get back on the Sabbath. So you kind of had to be tricky about those kind of things. So if you'd have 10 men, and you could then establish a synagogue. And so he was like the guy who was in charge. And that meant if he was in charge of the worship center, it meant he took care of all the needs of it. He made sure that everything was done. You got to make sure the pews are polished and well, they didn't have pews, but you got to make sure that all that is dealt with and taken care of. And so that was his task. That was his responsibility. He was trusted, and he was also responsible. And so he was very much respected, I would say. And now, was this in Capernaum, where the synagogue was? Maybe. We know that there was a synagogue in Capernaum. We also know that that's just been, within the last few years, been uncovered in Magdala, which would be 5 or 6 miles to the west along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Magdala means fish, or it means fish. What do I want to say? Fish, like fish products, or fish cooking, or fish, preserving. I guess that's the right word I was thinking. And so they had a fish preservation area there, because, fish will go bad pretty quick if you don't do some kind of salt or something to take care of them. And well, the Sea of Galilee is a natural water. It doesn't have salt. But just a few miles, about 40, 50 miles to the west is the Mediterranean Sea. And they got lots of salt there. So it's maybe one of the saltiest in the world. So they could, go over there, and they would get the salt and then bring it back. Plus the Salt Sea, or the Dead Sea, had salt in it, but it was a different kind of salt that was there. So anyway, here we are, and Jesus is teaching. He's walking with the crowd. They're pressing in around him hard. And here comes a man named Jairus, and he has a daughter. The daughter is 12, and she's his only daughter. Might even be his only child, is why they mention that she's the only daughter. And the crowd would have known her, or the people would have known her. And so they're kind of pressing in on him, and this man comes to him with this problem, with this issue. And it's kind of a kind of a hard thing. And so he fell down at Jesus' feet. He pleaded with him to come to his house, which signifies that he possibly had some respect for Jesus, or at least he saw this as an option. And sometimes when we are desperate, we will try anything. And so we see this here with this man coming to Jesus. And then over the next few verses, from verse 43 to 48, there's an interlude that happens there that you might know about. And that is, so as Jesus then goes to the home of Jairus, where his 12-year-old daughter is dying, as they're walking along, the crowd is so close and pressed in on him. There's a woman, and the woman is walking along with them. She has had an issue of blood for 12 years, same age as, same time as Jairus's daughter has been alive. And she has the faith to believe that if she can just touch the hem of the garment of Jesus, that she'll be healed, because nothing else has worked for 12 years. And so she gets close enough, she touches it, and thinking that no one will know, it'll be okay. She's got the faith to believe it can happen. Jesus stops and says to the disciples, "Who touched me?" And they're like, "Are you kidding me? Here's all these people pressing around you. Are you kidding me? How do we know? Everybody's touching you." And then when he said it, and the woman's still close enough to hear him say it, then she comes forward and she says, "It was me." And Jesus said to her, "You've got some faith, lady, to believe that all you had to do was just get near me and it would happen." And so then he says to her, "Your faith has made you whole," or "Your faith has saved you. Your faith has made you complete." Not only physically, but most would say, Jesus was saying, it's made you complete spiritually, because you have put your faith in me. And then to make sure that people don't think that, well, his robe has special powers or his garment has, special powers. Then, because if they thought that, what are they going to do? They're going to rip it right off of him, aren't they? I mean, they're going to throw him aside, kill him, or do whatever in order to get it. I mean, that's how human nature works, isn't it? So Jesus then says to her, he says, "Your faith is what made you whole." It's what you did. It's not what I did per se. It's what you did to experience what God could do in your life. And he dispelled any rumors or anything else about that because of that. And how wise is Jesus? Well, pretty smart guy, I think. I know. Okay, so then and that's sandwiched in the middle of this, and that's a whole other message. That's a whole other study, but it needs to be addressed, I think. So then it says in verse 49, while he was still speaking, and that means to the woman, he's talking to the woman, someone came from the synagogue leader's house and said, "Your daughter's dead." Now we get the impression that they were talking directly to Jairus. And then they said, "Not only is your daughter dead, but don't bother the teacher anymore." And when Jesus heard it, was he close enough that Jesus could hear? Well, probably, because if Jesus is going to the home of Jairus, he's going to be walking along with him. He's going to be with him somehow. And so this person who was the messenger who came to say that your daughter's dead, think about the difference in levels of faith we have. We've got three people that have confronted Jesus, or at least are in the story, the characters. We've got Jairus, who is a Jewish leader, but he's got faith enough to think that there's something going on with Jesus. So he comes to him because he's in need. Then we've got this woman who thinks all I got to do is just get near him and touch the robe of his, the hem of his robe of his garment there, and I'll be healed. And she was. And then we've got this person that comes and says to Jairus, "Your daughter's dead. Don't bother the teacher." Now, you can see the extreme. We got a guy who's got no faith. We got a woman who's got an extreme faith. And we got Jairus in the middle, who's kind of like, I think this can happen. Isn't that a good lesson for us that no matter where our level of faith is, except for the no faith, God still has the ability to do something, doesn't he? That's why Jesus talked about if you just got the faith of a mustard seed, just the littlest, smallest thing, man, it can bloom and blossom into a big, huge tree. So that's what he's getting at. Well, while he's still speaking, someone came to the synagogue leader from the synagogue leader's house and said, "Your daughter's dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore." When Jesus heard it, he answered him. Now, who's the him? Well, most would believe it was Jairus. Most would believe it wasn't this messenger who had no faith. He said, I believe Jairus simply because of what he said. Don't be afraid, only believe, and she will be saved. It's the same root word as what he said to the woman just moments before, when he said, your faith has saved you, or your faith has made you whole. So in context, you just begin to think, okay, we've seen this. Why did this happen? Well, it did. And now we're learning more through this interaction about faith. And so it says, after that, he came to the house and he let no one enter with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. This is the first instance of in the writings where we see that Peter, James, and John were this inner circle that Jesus had, these inner guys that he connected with. He had, like, there was Jesus, and then there was the inner circle, and then there was, the disciples, and then there was, 120 anyway, at least, that followed him pretty consistently. We have through the scriptures. And so let the mother and father in so they would be witnesses. Plus, guess who had the faith? The dad. He had some faith. And so everyone was crying and mourning for her. But he said, stop crying, because she's not dead, but asleep. We don't have time to talk about professional mourners, but they had professional mourners who, if you couldn't muster up enough sorrow for people, they believed that it was important that someone mourn or grieve over someone. And so they'd hire people to come and do it. And they probably weren't sincere. They were getting paid for it. But And I think they were like ambulance chasers, they would kind of, somebody might be dying over there. We better get over there. They might want to hire us to mourn for them or whatever when they die. So anyway, then it says they laughed at him because they knew she was dead. Sure. And she was dead. I don't think it was because they misread the symptoms, or they didn't take her pulse, or she didn't have a pulse, or whatever. I believe she died. She really was dead. And Jesus was trying to let them learn and know that death isn't final, especially when Jesus is around. It's not the final word, is it? There is life after death. So then we get to the last passage. Verses 54, 55, and 56 says, so he took her by the hand and called out, child, get up. Her spirit returned, and she got up at once. Then he gave orders that she be given something to eat. Her parents were astounded, but he instructed them to tell no one that it had happened. So what did Jesus do? Lifted her up. She got up. She was alive. He brought her back from the dead. And I think it's significant that he said, give her something to eat, because she really needed nourishment. I mean, I can't imagine dying and coming back and not being famished. And it might have been she needed something then to sustain life at that point. But the other thing is that he told them, don't go tell anybody. There's a whole crowd there, folks. There's all these people passing around him, and so much that he's being pushed and shoved, trying to get through to the street to just get to the house. And he says, don't tell anybody. Why was that? Well, we don't really know for certain, but we do think we can understand enough that it just wasn't quite his time yet. He wanted the right things to get out, the right truths to get out about it. So what's the lesson out of it? Death doesn't have the final word, does it? If we have faith in Jesus, then there is victory in him. Okay. God bless y'all. Got to go. Bye-bye. Those are great